Okay, so we shall move on to the first session. The first theme is imagining and creating a world without nuclear weapons. War still continues in many parts of the world, and there are even concerns about the use of nuclear weapons. It is precisely because of this situation that we need to continue to hold on to our ideals and aim for the world without nuclear weapons. But what exactly is it, the world without nuclear weapons? Why should we aim for such a world? Why? And what can we, as citizens, what can we do? We will consider these questions together with speakers from around the world and across generations. The speakers today, we have Mr. Francis KURIA, Secretary General, Religious for Peace International, Mr. Tariq RAUF, former head of the Verification and Security Policy Section at the International Atomic Energy Agency, Dr. Sumiko HATAKEYAMA, Executive Committee Member of Peace Boats, and Ms. Miho TANAKA, Co-President of Kakuwaka, Hiroshima Youth Voters Association for Learning about Nuclear Policy. Please welcome them. Good morning, everybody. So the first session of this forum, thank you so much for joining our session. My name is Miho Tanaka. I will be your moderator. And from the Japan campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and also co-chair of Kakuwaka, Hiroshima. As Mimi mentioned, so we want to go on with the discussion. What is it exactly, the world without nuclear weapons, and why do we need it, and what we can do for it, and how we can realize such an ideal? This is what we want to tackle in this forum. When we focus on the situation right now, it has already been 4th year since we have TPNW, and then we have another conference coming up, and we see that the citizens discuss about nuclear weapons, but that the bulletins of atomic scientists have just revealed that we only have 89 seconds to the midnight, to the world's end. A nuclear weapon has a big part of putting us in such a dismay. So I hope this session will give us a hint of hope, how to go toward this world, realizing world without nuclear weapons. And after this session, I hope that we will find each in our own ways to contribute to realize this ideal world. But we don't want to just stop ourselves on imagining that such an ideal, but we want to move ourselves forward toward this goal together. So we have a special guest today with the technical perspectives and work together with the civil society. I'd like to propose this get together to be very useful and fruitful. So the first speaker will be Mr. Tariq RAUF. Is the former head of the Verification Security Policy Section of the IAEA. And the second one is Mr. Francis KURIA, Secretary General of Religious for Peace International. And the third speaker is Sumiko HATAKEYAMA, Executive Committee Member of Peace Boats. So let's hear our special speakers. They will give us insights how we can go deep in our understanding toward our contribution for a world without nuclear weapons. So we will hear them.
Minasama, Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. So I'm very pleased to be here to join this event for International Civil Society's campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and also the Japanese campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. As we heard from the representative of Nihon Hidyanko, it is imperative now that we pull our forces together to strive to work to achieve a world without nuclear weapons. So the Nobel Committee last year decided to prize the voice of the Hiroshima. Normally, the Nobel Prize Committee gives the Peace Prize to activity related to nuclear weapons in years beginning in 5 or 0, but there were 2 exceptions. So one was last year. The other exception was in 2017, when the international campaign against nuclear weapons was given the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to help the 6 core countries that led the campaign diplomatically to achieve the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The IAEA, where I worked, got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. And then before that, in 1985, Pugwash International Conferences were awarded the Peace Prize for bringing together Soviet and American and Western scientists to work together to jointly solve the problem of nuclear ways of achieving stability, crisis stability, and arms control between the 2 superpowers. So I was asked today to be positive in trying to imagine a world without nuclear weapons. So I thought I would play for you a song. We'll see if it works. If not, I will read you the lyrics. So that was an interesting line, no countries to die for. And that's really the reason why we have nuclear weapons and this concept of nuclear deterrence, which has been with us for the past 80 years. Now, since this is the 80th anniversary year of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has moved to 89 seconds before midnight. And the concept of midnight in the doomsday clock is to signify the end of the world as a result of a catastrophic nuclear war. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists was established by Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer and other scientists who were involved in the Manhattan Project to develop the world's first nuclear weapons and nuclear explosive devices. When they saw the result of their work with the destruction of the 2 cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where primarily civilians were killed, they were quite concerned. And you might remember that Robert Oppenheimer even uttered the words, "Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," when they did the very first nuclear detonation on the 15th of July, 1945, in the Valley of Death in New Mexico, which ushered in the nuclear age. So nuclear scientists have been trying to work towards providing the scientific basis for achieving a world without nuclear weapons. But unfortunately, neither scientists nor diplomats have been successful. Since 1945 till now, cumulatively, we have made more than 110,000 nuclear weapons. Every one of them more powerful than the ones dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, it is estimated that we have about 12,100 weapons. So more than 90% of the nuclear warheads have been eliminated without fanfare, without international verification, we do not worry about those warheads that have been dismantled. So our residual task is how do we deal with the remaining 12,000 plus nuclear warheads? And one delaying tactic now is to find ways of doing the verification for the elimination of these warheads. My position is, which I also briefed the Conference on Disarmament at its request in March of this year, is that we do have a viable model, and that is of South Africa, which had made 6 nuclear warheads and then voluntarily renounced nuclear weapons and dismantled them, and then invited the International Atomic Energy Agency to do forensic analysis to confirm that they had indeed produced the nuclear material, and then they had indeed dismantled the 6 nuclear warheads. So at the moment, none of the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons are prepared to accept any international or bilateral or multilateral verification of dismantlement of nuclear warheads. We have a lot of experience in verifying the dismantlement of nuclear delivery vehicles, such as cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, long-range bombers, submarines, silos where intercontinental ballistic missiles are deployed, but not the actual warhead, which is the explosive device which contains the nuclear material. And it is the warhead, the detonation of which kills people. And we know the effects of that very well. So last year, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution which called for another scientific study to study the environmental and humanitarian consequences, not only of the use of nuclear weapons, but also of the development and testing of nuclear weapons over the past 80 years. The last such study was done as far back as 1985. It is not at all surprising that the nuclear armed states, for the most part, as well as their nearly 35 plus allied countries which have defense arrangements underpinned by nuclear weapons, were not supportive of yet another study. They said, we would know very well, we don't need any more studies. But led by Austria, as a result of the mandate provided at the third meeting of states parties to the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a 40-page study has been produced, which will be discussed at the upcoming meeting of states parties of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This study provides new evidence about the environmental and humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, which are not well known and not well appreciated. Nonetheless, unfortunately, the nuclear weapon states and their allies will push back against this. So this is where you come in, civil society. Now the days of making posters are over. We now need new technologies. Various social media technologies, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever, you are much more adept at it than my generation, is to spread the message so that your cohorts and the wider public are made more aware that we still have the existential risks of nuclear weapons, and to generate a voice that parliamentarians and politicians cannot ignore, that it is the wish and demand of the people of the world that we get rid of nuclear weapons, ideally before 2045, so that the age of nuclear weapons ends at 100 years or earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tariq-san. Truly, you have spoken from your formal expertise at IAEA, how we, the citizens, can participate into the work of abolishing nuclear weapons. I was kind of nervous to hear more of the difficult technical stories to come, but you have beautifully bridged the work of citizens that can do to and give us a hope how we can participate and to work together toward this acts of elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you so much for your inputs. Okay, so we move on to Mr. Francis.
Thank you. Thank you very much, moderator. Distinguished panelists, the delegates to this International Civil Society Forum, led by the Hibakusha of Nikkedu, and the members of the Sacred Heart University. I greet you all. I am greatly honored to be present at this forum, and it's a distinct honor and responsibility. Remembering the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings, the moral and humanitarian need to tackle the existential threats of nuclear weapons has never been more urgent. This forum provides a critical opportunity for reflection and action, highlighting our shared determination to build a world of peace, dignity, and justice. That is the imagination we need. A world of peace, dignity, and justice. The belief that nuclear weapons guarantee security is a fatally flawed concept. These weapons of mass destruction provide no genuine security whatsoever. Instead, they offer and endanger all of humankind and are a threat to our world and are a mechanism of terror. When nuclear weapons are destroyed, they don't only contribute to widespread destruction of life and humanity, but they also irreparably damage the planet that we call home. Nuclear weapons can create a widespread ecological catastrophe, and we must reject them for what they are. The continued presence of nuclear weapons creates a lasting danger. One of nuclear aggression, intentional or not, would cause unthinkable suffering and permanent destruction. Genuine security is not about the power to destroy and to dominate. The doctrine of deterrence lacks both logical and moral justification. Nuclear weapons are incompatible with the fundamental values of our common humanity. Their continued presence fuels the threat of catastrophic damage, violating the tenets of global solidarity, equality of people and nations, ethics of a just war, proportionality, and the sacredness of creation. We must all work together to reject nuclear weapons as tools of destructions with no place in society. These are not symbols of power or prestige. They are signs of humanity's failure to favor compassion over conflict. We must firmly state that their possession and spread are morally and ethically wrong. In this global effort, religious leaders have a specific, and significant role to play. Peace, justice, and compassion are core moral principles across our faiths. And I am speaking from the faith perspective. Because of their unique position, religious leaders can promote ethical consciousness and challenge the justification for nuclear weapons. Religious leaders, using their moral authority and spiritual guidance, must motivate communities to abandon weapons of mass destruction and choose coexistence, reconciliation, and global solidarity. To safeguard humanity's future, they need to champion nuclear disarmament, offer hope, and drive collective action. Hope is what we need, reimagination of a world where hope fills our world. Since the inception of Religions for Peace more than 50 years ago, advancing nuclear disarmament has been an integral part of our mission. Our founding at the first World Assembly in Kyoto, Japan in 1970 resulted in the Kyoto Declaration, calling for immediate steps towards gender disarmament and specifically nuclear disarmament. In each of the following 9 World Assemblies. Since then, Religions for Peace has prioritized nuclear disarmament. We understood and understand deeply that if humanity and our planet is to thrive, the elimination of nuclear weapons is paramount. Therefore, we have constantly ensured that we continue to act to eliminate nuclear weapons. One such effort, the Arms Done campaign, led by the Global Interfaith Youth Network, spearheaded in 2010, delivering a petition signed by 20 million people to the United Nations Secretary General High Representative on disarmament, specifically calling for the elimination of nuclear weapons. Religions for Peace partnership with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, began in 2007. Since then, we have jointly implemented various advocacy and actions in our efforts to create a world without nuclear weapons, including developing and publishing a nuclear ban treaty negotiation handbook in 2017. In recent years, in partnership with ICAN and Religions, the partnership between ICAN and Religions Peace has strengthened with the Africa Council of Religious Leaders representing the Religions for Peace movement on ICAN's international steering group. A world without nuclear weapons is not only a dream, but an achievable mission. This vision requires bold and decisive steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons on the world stage and to keep the nightmare of nuclear war firmly in the past. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons offers a clear and actionable framework for realizing this action, this vision. This emphasizes the critical need for religious actors to act in reimagining a world without nuclear weapons and activating their communities towards achieving this vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your message. You have mentioned that the world religious leaders have talked much about the justice, keep it the very core of their values, justice and peace in their beliefs. We have just been chatting in the back room. You talked about that your wish that even Japanese society also should embrace that the religious life, the importance of religious communities and the beliefs to pursue the world peace. And I myself was not very aware of this aspects of the society, so that you working deepening the partnership with ICAN would really help us to understand the importance of this aspects. So Hatakeyama-san, yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
All right, so I'd like to start by using slides. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sumiko HATAKEYAMA, and I am the executive committee member of the NGO Peace Boat. So today we are going to talk about sozo, which means imagine and create. So I really thought about what I should talk about. And for myself, that means both imagining and creating a world without nuclear weapons. And closely related to this creation and imagination are the two words hibakusha and world. So let's go on to the next slide. This is a picture of Peace Boat. It carries around 1,700 passengers as it travels around the world. We run this round the world cruise 3 times a year. Last year, we had Tanaka Terumi-san joining us on one of the cruises. And nowadays, we use this large ship, But when I first boarded Peaceboat as a volunteer interpreter, it was a much smaller ship 15 years ago. And at the time, 15 years ago, this was the beginning of Global Voyage for a Nuclear-Free World, also known as the Hibakusha Project. And this was in 2008, the first year of this project. And a total of 100 Hibakusha were invited to travel around the world to give their testimonies. I was 19 then, and I had spent most of my life in the Kanto region, and this was the first time I had ever even met a Hibakusha and heard their testimonies. And it was then, for the first time, I really tried to imagine a world in which no nuclear weapons had ever been used. I also tried to imagine the destruction and suffering that nuclear weapons had caused. And going back to the title of this session, imagining and creating a world without nuclear weapons, I think to get there, the first step in doing so is to imagine a world with weapons. And for me, the atomic bomb survivors, the Hibakusha, gave me the opportunity to imagine this world. And it was through this trip around the world that I was able to really imagine what had happened to the people that I had only seen through photographs. So this is a picture of the mushroom cloud. And I really tried imagining the people who were under this cloud. And it was also then that I first met people who had spent their entire lives trying to create this world without nuclear weapons. And inspired by them, I began to think that I wanted to become someone like that. I wanted to become involved. And so from there, as a member of Peaceboat, I began to spend my days trying my best to imagine and create. So examples of what I did was give testimonies at schools in various places. I also attended UN conferences. This is actually a picture from the UN interpretation booth. And I tried to use my skills in various ways to help create a world without nuclear weapons. And the more I began to connect with people around the world, the deeper my imagination of what a nuclear-free world would be like became. And it was a world that I truly wanted to take part of. This is a picture of an Indigenous person from Australia. And they are one of the many victims of nuclear testing. On Peaceboat, we also visited Tahiti. The local people there were forced to take part in nuclear testing. This is Ms. Evelyn. She's from the Marshall Islands. And there in the Marshall Islands, even now, nuclear testing is still being conducted. And in the United States, Hibakusha exist as well. So we talk about how nuclear weapons can help protect its citizens, but there are downwinders in the United States. There are also people who lived near mines of uranium. So connecting with this side of the world really helped me realize that there are so many victims. I don't only want to talk about negative things. Mr. Francis mentioned the concept of hope. And one of these examples of moments of hope was when the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted. I really learned firsthand through ICANN and meeting with activists that we can really change the world. I also realized that it's possible to create a new international law. And of course, in the next picture, can we go on to the next slide? Oh, sorry. Okay, can you go back a little bit? One more. Okay. All right, sorry, this photo is not included, unfortunately. I thought I included a picture from Oslo. But this is the Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to the Hiroo was proof that trying to create a world can really change it. And in Oslo, at the award ceremony, I saw many local anti-nuclear groups who were working really hard to create this nuclear-free world. That being said, we are still living in a very high-risk period. This is a picture of the captain of Peace Boat, and he's taking refuge in Romania. He is originally from Ukraine. This is a photo set from Gaza. And while a ceasefire agreement has finally came into effect, both Ukrainians and Palestinians are under threat from nuclear weapons. And as we connect to the world, it's time for us to work even harder to imagine and create a world without nuclear weapons. So can we go into the final slide? This is a picture of Peace Boat when we work with young people from East Asia on the topic of how we can work together to think about the future. We want to continue to create a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you, Sumiko-san. Thank you for talking about your experiences, meeting the Hibakusha, and how we can both imagine and create a nuclear-free world together. And based on the content, this is going to go back into our session where we will all discuss what we can do to create this world. Thank you, all three of you, for providing such powerful speeches. Now I want to delve deeper. So up till now, some things were mentioned about what we can do, the challenges that we have ahead, the security of our world, and the paradox of owning nuclear weapons. Even now, many people believe that deterrence can protect our nation, but how do we fight against that? How do we get actual national security? So let's talk about that topic. All right, Mr. Tariq, do you think you can provide any insight?
So the very first discussion on common security and human security started with a notable report called Our Common Future. This was done by former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, and it came back as far back as 1987. And the concept of common security, sustainable development, environmental protection all emanate from that first report on common security. Over time, common security was interpreted as also, in a broader sense, as human security, which brought in these different perspectives of the environment, of humanity, and preservation of the world. But unfortunately, we have two competing narratives. One narrative is that nuclear weapons have preserved the peace since the end of the Second World War, and that nuclear weapons prevented a central strategic war between the United States and the Soviet Union. A counter to that is that that may well be true that the two superpowers did not fight a direct nuclear war, attacking each other's homelands, or fight a war in Europe when Europe was divided between East and West. But the two superpowers engaged in proxy wars in the Far East, in Africa, in Latin America, and the Middle East, and many millions of people died in other parts of the world as a result of their policies. And nuclear weapons are used daily in a political sense. The 5 nuclear weapon states spare no effort in emphasizing that as permanent members of the Security Council, they have a special responsibility under the Charter of the United Nations for maintaining international peace and security. But the P5 in that context, the permanent 5 in the Security Council, that does not correlate to the UN Charter in terms of nuclear weapons. So the 5 try to equate their continuing possession of nuclear weapons with their responsibilities under the UN Charter as permanent members. So for the young people, the new narrative should be we should not use the term P5 for the 5 nuclear weapon states when it comes to nuclear weapons. We tend to use a new term called the N5, nuclear 5, because the Charter does not in anywhere mention nuclear weapons as being associated with permanent status of membership in the Security Council and the veto privileges that it brings to those 5 countries. So one of the major challenges created by the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons for countries that rely on nuclear weapons is that they are losing the narrative defending extended deterrence and the efficacy of deterrence. Now, normally it is civil society that launches protests, but when in June 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was brought up in the General Assembly for a vote for adoption, 3 nuclear weapon states staged a protest outside the door of the General Assembly, led by the United States, flanked by France, flanked by the United Kingdom, and there were 3 or 4 other of their friendly European states, members of NATO. And they were trying to prevent non-nuclear weapon states from entering the hall to vote for adoption of the TPNW. In the event, it got 127 votes. Since then, the nuclear weapon states and some of their allies have an unrelenting campaign to try to encourage those states that have signed the TPNW but not ratified it yet not to ratify it. And there was a time when they were even encouraging TPNW signatories to unsign the TPNW, particularly when it was at around 47, 48 ratifications. With 50 ratifications, the treaty would have entered into force. That's when the pressure was at its highest. Now, I live in Austria, which is a small neutral country which has been punching above its weight, has been one of the leaders, along with New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa, Brazil, and Mexico, in pushing for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It's a lonely voice in the European Union where in the past there used to be 2 nuclear weapon states and now there is 1 nuclear weapon state and 5 countries that host nuclear weapons under a so-called NATO umbrella. And some new members of NATO are itching for the United States to deploy nuclear weapons on their territory. And very unfortunately, the Russian Federation has redeployed nuclear weapons into Belarus. So we need to find ways of protesting and opposing this in all international forums and in all civil society forums. Ambassador Kement, Alexander Kement from Vienna will be here tomorrow, I understand. He was one of the primary movers and drafters, along with some other colleagues, of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. He has received many honors for his work, and I encourage you to listen to his presentation when he does it, because he has made a very persuasive connection about the inefficacy of nuclear deterrence, about the importance of the recognition of the environmental and humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and to bring new evidence and new information before the world so that we again can understand that nuclear weapons are incompatible with human beings. And this is not something new. We have known this for many years, but we haven't practiced what we know. We are the only species on Earth that pollutes its own home. No other animal pollutes its home. So we have created all kinds of pollution, but also nuclear pollution, as was referred to by our colleague, in terms of activities related to. It's sort of very interesting that the nuclear weapon states refer to the nuclear weapons activities as the nuclear enterprise, as if it's sort of a business enterprise. So the nuclear enterprise means all aspects of the military nuclear fuel cycle, that is producing the nuclear material for nuclear weapons, making the nuclear weapons, sustaining nuclear weapons, ensuring their long life expectancy. And now with the nuclear modernizations that are underway, unfortunately, we will have nuclear weapons until the rest of the century, until the rest of us who do not have nuclear weapons and do not rely for our security on nuclear weapons rise up and oppose this in all forums. This will not be an easy struggle. The award of the Nobel Peace Prize to Nihon Hideyanko was not a very welcome development for some governments, because deliberately the Nobel Prize Committee wanted to highlight the existing dangers of nuclear weapons, particularly these days when open threats are being made about the use of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are being modernized. New types of delivery systems, such as hypersonic weapons, nuclear-powered missiles, are being talked about. We also now have the risk of the weaponization of space. We do have the Outer Space Treaty and the so-called Celestial Bodies or Moon Treaty, which prohibits the deployment and testing of nuclear weapons on the moon and other celestial bodies and in space. But if you remember, under the Reagan administration, there was the plan for Star Wars. And so having lasers in space, having anti-satellite weapons, having nuclear-powered interceptors in space, all of these things are coming back, partly under Mr. Trump's Space Force, which he already put in place in his first term. And now more money will be devoted to it. And so we need, in the Conference on Disarmament and the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna, non-nuclear weapon states need to have a unified voice. And unfortunately, on our side, that is the side of the non-nuclear weapon states, we do not yet have a unified voice. Also, my last comment, in the peace movement, the award of the Nobel Prize to ICANN also divided the peace movement among those who want a nuclear weapons convention. And again, I would also appeal to civil society. Now that we have the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, that's the best that we are going to get. It does not in any way undermine the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is an effective measure under Article 6 of the NPT. And just as a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, nuclear weapon-free zone treaties do not undermine the Non-Proliferation Treaty, neither does the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Thank you so much for your speech, your proposal that we should switch. That's your understanding of the P5 into nuclear 5, and the talk about the privileges. And raise our voices toward the existing narratives and existing model of world with nuclear weapons. Sumiko, you talked about he talked about the human security. We have always been talking about this, but many people have doubts it. And they just cannot erase this idea of the security protected by nuclear weapons. How can you go against this narrative? How can we find ourselves able to contribute to realize the world nuclear weapons? Can you touch upon this?
So I teach at university about nuclear weapons and their consequences, but nuclear deterrence. And I think we should debate more about nuclear treaties Over the last 3 years, I've found younger people becoming more concerned about these issues. So what can we do? There are 2 things that I'd like to share. First is that, like I mentioned before, we really need every individual to consider what the world is like as nuclear weapons exist. This is incredibly important because regardless of our generation, maybe compared to several decades before, we debated justice and sustainability and how they are important. This awareness grew over the past few decades. But when we talk about injustice and what citizens have experienced over the years, we need to focus on the inhumanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and nuclear testing. And us as activists, we have this strong sense of the abolition of nuclear weapons. We've studied, we've debated, and we've come to the conclusion that we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. However, in a world where the threat of nuclear weapon use is prevalent, it's not so much the debate of whether we should possess nuclear weapons or not. It's about the debate and the importance, for example, of the NPT. We need to hold these treaties to their word and try to really deepen the debate. I know after World War II, we've come to a period of peace. However, we need to be more wary of what the world will lead to. Thank you, Ms. Sumiko. Hearing from you now, this is a very personal account, but I have become involved in politics and I have attended conferences. But what's most important is to realize that this is very important for all of us citizens. This isn't just politicians and victims to nuclear testing. This involves all of us. And we need to spread this debate further. Mr. Francis, do you have any words that you'd like to add? It could be about human or national security. If you have any comments, please share.
Thank you very much. In 2006, Religions for Peace held its 8th World Assembly in Kyoto, Japan. And during that World Assembly, we expounded on a theme on shared human security. The concept of shared human security is not based on domination. It's not based on bullying of some state on others. It is based on an understanding that we share and are together in this world, and that the security of one threatened is the security of all threatened. And in 2019, we went to our 10th World Assembly, and the concept of shared human security was expanded to include shared well-being, and that we need to ensure the well-being of all, and that shared human security is part of shared well-being. The inequality in the world, the bullying in the world, the wars in the world is because some people feel that they have a superior responsibility or a superior place in global affairs, and that they could lord it over others. So the concept of shared well-being must be part of the thinking around human security, and that all are one, are created by the sacred. And therefore, it's important for us. And secondly, I would want to say that bringing the grassroots into the discussion is very important. We need to mobilize, inform, and activate the grassroots networks from the religious to the secular world to stigmatize the possession and threat of use of nuclear weapons. Right now, it's still quite fine for people to possess and threaten to use nuclear weapons on others. We need to create a global movement, a very strong global movement that stigmatizes people who possess and threaten to use nuclear weapons as evil people, because they are truly evil. And we need to encourage countries who still believe that they are afforded a sense of security by those who are possessing nuclear weapons, that really they are standing on the wrong side of history. They need to move to the right side of history, because nuclear weapons will become stigmatized and useless in the very near future.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. In Japan, we need to stigmatize the existence of nuclear weapons, whether it's ICANN or the other people involved with the TPNW. We really need to believe in the power of words. And even in Japan, not many people are aware of the concept of stigmatization. I think it's really difficult to translate the word stigmatize, because the concept it does not really exist in Japanese society. We really need to push this concept of stigmatization of nuclear weapons to our local governments. And I really felt the importance upon hearing your words. So thank you, Mr. Francis. We still have a little bit of time left, but you mentioned grassroots activism. Do you have any additional words when it comes to grassroots activism and how that can really connect to activism or stigmatization, Sumiko-san?
Yes, the grassroots need to connect with the global and international diplomatic frameworks so that the work of advocacy and awareness raising at the grassroots level addresses some of the discussions that are going on at the global level, at the national level. So we need to align the grassroots efforts with the international diplomatic frameworks. For example, the meeting of state parties that starts in the beginning of March, the grassroots must be able to connect. And as my brother said, we don't need placards anymore. We can actually participate quite effectively using social media and other new media to address such meetings and international fora. And that when the grassroots are seized of this matter and they are able to participate effectively in discussions, it will be one of the steps towards the process of stigmatization. So we need to make the grassroots aware of the international frameworks. We expect next year the review conference to be held on the TPNW. The grassroots need to be made aware of the treaty review processes so that they can participate and, if possible, influence some of the discussions that the member states will be having on the review process. We can align the grassroots with the victim assistance processes that are being put in place. We know that this third meeting of state parties is going to consider the victim assistance processes, especially for those affected from the nuclear test sites. And the grassroots need to be aware and aligned to the processes that will take place by providing information, mobilizing them, and giving them opportunity to participate directly in those processes. And this is important because the treaty must become alive to the people's lives, and the treaty must speak to the people who are most affected by it, and they must be able to see that the treaty is addressing their needs. And it's only it's only by aligning the grassroots with the international diplomatic frameworks that we are able to ensure that this happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tariq. Do you have any additional comments? Okay, so we're running out of time a little bit, but if you have any final words, please share. If you have any final words, Mr. Tariq.
Thank you. So since we are here at the Sacred Heart University, I'd like to remind you that His Holiness the Pope Francis some years ago pronounced on the immorality of nuclear weapons. So that's also a message to spread. Now, the TPNW core group of states decided that they would focus on stigmatizing nuclear weapons, not persons or people or states per se. So you stigmatize the instrument of death, which is the nuclear weapon, and not the people who have it, although others might want to do so. And that's also been a very successful campaign. Now, the TPNW proceedings and the NPT proceedings are live cast on UN Web TV. So you don't need to go to New York. I've always been concerned, why do we hold the TPNW and the NPT meetings in New York, which is in a nuclear weapon state, which means we are contributing to the economy of that state. In 2005, I was quite successful in moving the first preparatory committee meeting of the Non-Proliferation Treaty from New York to Vienna. And since then, I have been on a lonely campaign to move the NPT review conference from New York to Vienna. It is a neutral country. It doesn't have nuclear weapons. It is in the middle of the world, East and West. And you would not be contributing to the economy of a nuclear weapon state. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the opposition has come from non-aligned countries and non-nuclear weapon states. So I would like the grassroots movement to also campaign that we should not hold nuclear non-proliferation treaty and TPNW conferences in any nuclear weapon state, but to hold them in a country that is neutral, that does not rely on nuclear weapons, is a leader in the campaign in the abolition of nuclear weapons. And finally, coming back to new technologies, now we have all kinds of new technologies, ChatGPT, DeepSeek, AI, and so on. And so for the young people, you now have vast opportunities that my generation didn't have. We needed to print out posters, hand them out at the corners of streets and so on, use loudspeakers. So with each person with your device can spread the message very broadly. At the first meeting of the TPNW, which was held in Vienna, I'm part of a small group called Atomic Reporters. Our mandate is to help journalists and civil society cover nuclear issues. So we brought in young people of your generation. We asked them to make short videos of 1 minute or 2 minutes the way they wanted, whether they could talk to a person or whatever, to highlight the dangers of nuclear weapons. And that was a very effective campaign. And so I would like very much to recommend that to you as well, and to the Japan campaign on the abolition of nuclear weapons, to use the new technologies, new ways of communication, and also to find ways not to contribute to the economies of nuclear weapon states. And here I'd like to commend Norway. It was actually Norwegian funding which allowed the 6 core group states to do the background work on the TPNW. Norway, because of its oil wealth, has a sovereign fund of nearly €1 trillion, and they have a policy not to invest in funds that derive profits from nuclear weapons or the military. So again, that is a campaign civil society can launch, that their governments and their pension funds and their schools and universities not invest their monies that derive in funds that derive profits from the military or nuclear weapon activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your brilliant proposals about how we can be engaged in this campaigns, even from afar, using technologies and not contributing to the economy of nuclear weapon states.
Thank you very much. I think I want to concentrate on my final remarks to the youth, the young people. the new technologies that have been spoken about have made you metropolitan and cosmopolitan. Unfortunately, our generation and those who are older are moving towards more isolationist tendencies. Right-wing politics is gaining ground, and people are closing up out of fear and a siege mentality. Really, the world, your world, is going to be a more cosmopolitan world, and that the place of nuclear weapons as methods of terror and domination must not be part of that new world. And I call upon the young people to imagine their ability to force the world to accept this new reality of a cosmopolitan world where nuclear weapons are not used as tools of terror and domination. And that is possible. And the young people, the global youth community is capable, because we have seen many situations where they are actually causing a change in the narrative. It's possible for the young people using the new technologies to actually change the world, given the fact that you are now cosmopolitan, because you are not bound by borders anymore. The new media has given you a borderless world. Please use it, and let's create a world free of nuclear weapons. The ICAN has been instrumental in this campaign. Please join ICAN. Please watch out on ICAN website, and please connect with other youth throughout the world as we campaign for a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an encouraging word for the young people, including myself. I myself consider myself young still. And beyond that, I think we have felt very much encouraged that we can find ourselves the ways to participate in this efforts. Sumiko, would you like to say something first? Yes, when I come back to the theme of the session, imagining and creating the world without nuclear weapons, I think creativity is a key for a new world. I talked about my lectures in the university. In my university classes, I ask questions. What can we do? But then I ask my students to write up their ideas about what citizens can do, the business can do, the organizations can do, the activists. We often think that the experts can move the world, not just amateurs like myself. If each of you have professions, you have your own expertise. Earlier, as we mentioned, the divestments, how the business enterprise, or we can intervene the nuclear business toward the world without nuclear weapons. But I think each and every one of us can find a creative ways to contribute to such attempts. Thank you so much. Being creative, it can be very challenging sometimes in everyday life, including myself. But this opportunity like this brainstorming with the people is very good. Often, many times, many people can find time to have such a rich time to do the brainstorming. So that I think it's also important to find time, find a mental space to hold a dialogue on such issues. So that the first session will conclude like this. How did you like it? I hope you liked it. So we move on to the following sessions. I think other experts would come in to provide us more information. But even in such a detailed talk, I hope that we will continue to use our imaginations and find alliance with people to hold a community of people discussing about these issues of abolishing nuclear weapons. Thank you so much, all the panelists. Thank you.